and suffering severe burns. The responsibility for the death of this little hero lies with the Western sponsors of Kyiv, who continue to supply the Bandera regime with deadly and destructive weapons. They completely lost the desire to speak about the human rights. July 10, a 73 person died. In Kursk, 11 July, Sukhodol, another person was killed. During the mining operation, 2 people died on July 14, Lipetsk region. At night, 2 people were injured as a result of the fall of a drone on the territory of an agricultural enterprise. Tula region, during the aftermath of a nighttime attack by enemy drones on Tula, on July 11, a rescue worker was killed. Kherson region, city of Alyoshki, 11th of July, drone destroyed a building and killed people. Searching for people were hampered by the attack of drones from the side of the Ukrainian forces. On the 13th of July, in the region of Alyoshki, 2 women and 1 man were injured. On the 9th of July, in Gorlovka, a woman and a man were injured. At night, a city was attacked on July 11. 3 people were injured as a result of UAV attacks. The Russian courts continue to sentence mercenaries for their crimes in Kursk region against civilians, and there are a lot of people who were sentenced and captured. Among them, there are people Yuri Sienkiewicz, Maxim Strinets, Konstantin Brovchak, Vladimir Dmysh, Alexei Babenko, 17 years old, Bogdan Didok, 17 years old, Roman Zhmuydin, 16 years old, Maxim Zlotarenko, 15, Sergei Pachkov, 15, Dmitry Verbitsky, 16, Alexander Vysotsky, 16, Sergei Baranyuk, 16, Sergei Valchuk, 14 years old. Look at them all, those who got these long sentences. If you look at the date of birth of these people, they are not only young people, they are those mentioned by Zelensky as children. It is all reminiscent of the fascist Hitler youth. They're killing their lives, and at Bankova Street they receive a lot of money for this. A sniper of the neo-Nazi battalion Azov was convicted for the murder in March 2022 of 2 residents of Mariupol for 24 years. The British mercenary Adam William was sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment in absentia. He was placed on the international wanted list. And with all that, Zelensky decided to mark this day and celebrate the day of baptism of Kyiv, Russia, Ukraine. It was celebrated on 15 July. I would like to remind you that it was established by Zelensky in the year 2021, and it was a day of baptism of Kyiv, Russia, Ukraine. What does it mean? What does this celebration mean? Why they changed the date? It was shifted from 28th of July, when the Orthodox world celebrates the baptism adopted in 1988 year. They wanted to kill the canonic church, and they do this consequently. And speaking on this matter, Zelensky didn't mention at all why they call this Kyiv, Rus, Ukraine, but he spoke a lot about the important event, as he thought of this, that underlines the links between eras and generations, high values of the Ukrainian people and the ability of Ukrainians, according to Zelensky, to overcome hardships. He didn't say that these hardships that for Ukrainians were connected with his activities. Of course, he has deliberately overlooked the real state of affairs in the country, in Ukraine, that turned into the Western colony and risks losing its statehood. Zelensky didn't speak about the fact that in order to keep his power, he's ready to sacrifice the faith of millions of his fellow citizens and Ukraine itself. And his view on establishment of the Ukraine as a country, he included canonic Orthodox Church, and everything that left of the Orthodox religion shall be destroyed. And we can see how they distort and falsify facts of history. Ukrainization of the people from the time of existence of the princes, Ukrainization of outstanding personalities of the era of existence of the ancient Russia state, the great princes of Kyiv, Yaroslav the Wise, Vladimir Monomach. This all underlines the desire to create Kiev, Rus, and Ukraine, to turn it into the only heir of the Kiev Rus. There is no doubt that all the story of Zelensky will fail, and no matter how hard they try on the Vankova Street to substitute facts of history with their own version, they won't be able to succeed. And it can be seen by the empty temples taken away from the Orthodox Church throughout Ukraine. They can take away the walls, but they cannot take away the soul of the people. They do everything possible to impose on believers their own idea of holiday dates and how it shall be celebrated, if at all. But they will never get the results they need. They demonstrate their force. They do everything by force to deprive people of the freedom of conscience and statehood. We heard a lot that Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty, and we need to help Ukraine with it in this week. Let us look at the facts. 35 years ago, on July 16, 1990, the Supreme Council of the USSR adopted the Declaration on State Sovereignty, according to which Ukraine, and I'm citing, solemnly declares its intention to become, in the future, a permanently neutral state that does not participate in military blocs, adheres to 3 non-nuclear principles: not to accept, not to produce, and not to acquire nuclear weapons. It also proclaimed the equality of citizens of the Republic, including on the basis of their language. These are the characteristic features of the sovereignty of Ukraine. Subsequently, reference to the declaration was included in the Act of Proclamation of Independence of Ukraine of 24 August 1991. These norms were also incorporated in the Constitution of Ukraine. I will remind you, it was adopted on 28 June 1996. However, none of the above mentioned have been respected by those who seized power after the military coup in February 2014. These people deprive Ukraine of its sovereignty by undermining the principles of this sovereignty, which was the foundation. The existence of Ukraine gives a refusal, with the assistance of the West, of the legal foundations of the Ukraine existence as an independent, peaceful state has become a purposeful course of neo-Nazi dictatorship that destroy all Russians and pose a security threat to Russia and all Europe. Therefore, the complete and irreversible eradication of all the causes that led to the emergence of the Ukrainian crisis remains the main requisite for achieving a final and fair settlement of the conflict. The sooner this is understood at the Bankova Street and by the Western countries, the sooner it will be resolved. The conference on reconstruction of Ukraine, 10-11 July, Rome celebrated the conference with the participation of 5,000 delegates from 70 countries and 40 international organizations. I would like to remind you the similar events was celebrated in 2017. It was conducted from 2017 to 2022 on the issues of reformation of Ukraine. And for the fourth year, the main attention is focused on military assistance to Kyiv regime. That is not to restore Ukraine, but to destroy it. The discussion on this issue, the tone of the discussion of this topic was set by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who clearly stated the need to invest in Ukraine superiority in the military technical sphere. She made it clear that the Readiness 2030 plan to allocate 800 billion euros can be spent on Ukraine as well. She proposed to use the underutilized capacities of its military enterprises to ensure the defense capabilities, you would think, of Ukraine, but not the defense capabilities of the European Union. And she actively advertised military orders to place military orders of the Ukrainian, place them on the Ukrainian market for arms and military equipment, and by this increase the military capabilities of Europe. According to von der Leyen, this assistance to the regime of Zelensky will make it possible for NATO members to easily carry out the required regulations required by Washington to bring the defense expenditures to the level of 5% of GDP. I think that if there were a hypocrisy competition, then this situation would win the competition and would take a special prize, because first they were saying that they needed to protect Ukraine, and then they stated that Ukraine is a fortress of some sort, and now they need to place military orders in Ukraine with the help of Ukrainians to get through Ukraine money to maintain, and not only to maintain, but to send them to Washington. As for the restoration of Ukraine, there were different numbers of costs for these purposes, but it wasn't an important thing. Ursula von der Leyen said another thing, and she said it literally. Now Ukraine is a way to pay Washington, who increased tariffs up to 5% of the GDP of the economies of Europe. Schmigal, for example, mentioned a number of $1 trillion, from which $540 billion should be covered through by means of Russian assets, and the rest shall be covered by the European Union. The most pointless and meaningless speech at the conference was that of Zelensky. He used his insinuations about endless drone attacks of Russia, and with that excuse he was begging from allies new resources for strengthening systems of air defense, production of drones, interceptors and missiles. He called for a systematic and regular nature of aid to Kyiv, and proposed to turn it into a kind of post-war U.S. Marshall Plan for Western Europe. Just imagine, Europe openly says them at the Bankova Street that they will use them to pay Washington, and the Kyiv continue asking for money. All this shows that this is a corruption scheme between Brussels and the Kyiv regime. The West, with all its elites and political circles and Bank of Street, are all connected in this sense. He proposed to create a coalition for reconstruction and called on partners not to be shy and demanded them to give as much as possible to Ukraine, because Ukraine is now allegedly preparing for winter and spends its own money on it. Or what do they mean by their own money? Maybe Zelensky thought of his personal money, because there we can find not only for preparation for winter, but for several continents. Money for several continents to be prepared for winter. His pleas were not heard, and Ursula von der Leyen said that what they can use is a fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine, with the initial capital of about 200 million euros. The total amount of investments announced during the conference did not exceed 10 billion euros, because this is for the reconstruction. They spent a lot of billions for killing of people, not for reconstruction. For comparison, in 2024 in Berlin, it was possible to collect promises for 16 billion euros. A year earlier in London, 60 billion euros were announced. This is a sort of fear of untrue promises that they had in Rome. The result could not be different, because everybody understands that they are invited to contribute in their territory in Ukraine, which has rampant corruption and lawlessness. And it's not independent, because we are speaking about the country immersed. We are talking about a country which is a colony for the West. As for the summit of coalition of the willingness,
on July 10th this year, the 6th summit of the Coalition of the Willing, with the participation of representatives of 32 states and international organizations, took place in a hybrid format. And its main inspirator was the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and the French President Emmanuel Macron, who held the discussion at the joint headquarters of the British Armed Forces Command in Northwood. And they were joined from Rome, from the fields of the above-mentioned conference on the restoration of Ukraine, by Vladimir Zelensky, as well as by Keith Kellogg, Special Envoy of the U.S. President for Ukraine, Senators Lindsey Graham, who is an extremist and terrorist, and Richard Blumenthal. As a result of the summit, a formula of foreign support for Ukraine was confirmed immediately after the ceasefire was reached. They emphasized the need for a so-called, as they refer to it, multinational force Ukraine. And their mandate is to restore the combat potential of the Ukrainian armed forces, ground forces, through the assistance of experts in armaments, military training, and logistics. Macron and Starmer also announced plans for joint patrols with the Ukrainian Air Force and air, as well as part of a mine countermeasures group at sea, as they say, to ensure the restoration of the Ukrainian army and to send a strategical signal to Moscow. Macron also announced an increase in the size of the potential French-British contingent for possible deployment on the territory of Ukraine after the ceasefire, from the level of a brigade to the level of an army corps. As they say, it will now amount to about 50,000 people. The creation of a permanent multinational operational headquarters under British-French leadership, which will be called Multinational Force Ukraine, which will be alternately stationed in Paris or London, as well as a coordination center in Kyiv, which should be headed by a two-star general of the British Army, was announced. What kind of sovereignty of Ukraine are they even talking about? But at the same time, the final joint statement and press release failed to mention the need for U.S. support for these plans. However, the British and French supposedly have not given up the idea of involving the U.S. in their brave plans, emphasizing the guarantee and not auxiliary as before nature of the multinational for Ukraine. And I am quoting all of this here, all the details of their work, for just one person to pose one question, not a rhetorical one, but a very practical one. Where, among all of this, has there been a mention, or supposedly someone gave a thought to the word negotiations, to peace? Because it wasn't that long ago that they scream about the need for ceasefire, that we should take a pause and there should be negotiations. They asked for the place at the negotiations table. And how long has it been? It's barely been 2 weeks, and apparently that all along, while talking about the peaceful negotiations, they were preparing for the creation of these multinational force, Ukraine. So whether we should believe them and what's actually in their minds, we have repeatedly declared the absolute unacceptability of the deployment in Ukraine of units of the armed forces of other states under any flag. We regard this as the preparation of foreign intervention. We'll regard such so-called multinational forces as a legitimate military objective. These facts and everything else that just does not fit the time limit of the briefing confirm the relevance of a special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and eliminate threats emanating from its territory. All its objectives will certainly be achieved. And about the amazing what we've spoken already about the contraband of the Kyiv regime of the Western armaments. We've already raised this issue and the contraband of arms. This remains a truly profiting business for Bankavaya. And they count the turnout of billions of dollars, not per year, but per month. The very same money that Zelensky is trying to bribe from the West in order to fill the holes in his budget, while thousands of young Ukrainians fall victims. And against this backdrop, the Ukrainian junta is getting richer and richer. The unlawful trade is fully controlled by the organized crime that is being condoned by the corrupted officials. And the volumes of these contraband are insane. Only according to the official data, which is significantly understated, from January to April 2025, in attempts to illegally export to European Union countries, more than 2,100 units of weapons, primarily firearms and anti-tank missile systems, were seized. Just think about it. Missile systems that are being smuggled from the Ukrainian territory. How do we feel about this? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's keep going. Allow me to recall that in April 2024, the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Klemenko, has admitted that the population disposes of about 1 to 5 million units of firearms in the hands of the population. How exactly did the Ukrainian population get their hands on that? This is what they obtained legally, what they purchased or what they've stolen. And the arms smuggling abroad is happening through several routes, and one of them is the land route through south of Poland. And after that, it just dissipates in the European space. The transit infrastructure to Hungary, Romania, Poland, and Slovakia is also used. One of the transit points for illegal weapons from Ukraine remains Moldova. In the Balkans, there is a whole hub for arms to be smuggled from Ukraine. And the smuggling is taking place not through some shady schemes online, but literally out in the open. A new transit point has been created in the Finland. They're actively using maritime routes as well as Port of Odessa to Bulgaria, Turkey, Montenegro, and African countries, as well as air routes from western regions of Ukraine utilizing aircraft being shipped toward the Middle East, which we've also spoken about. Cases of Western arms appearing in various corners of the world have become more frequent, and the issue is so widespread that even Western intelligence agencies have to recognize it. Perhaps someone would like to say that there's no way. I would like to give you an example. On May 17 this year, during operational investigative activities conducted by Interpol in the main port of Montenegro, a significant shipment of German firearms was discovered, totaling, do you know how much? 20,000, 50,000 euros? No. 30 million euros. Can you imagine? Firearms worth so much money. At the end of May this year, the U.S. Department of Defense began investigating cases of the terrorist organization Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, using Western-made weapons, as well as identifying the supply routes for military goods. Turned out that this weaponry had been obtained from Ukraine during the special operation conducted by the U.S. Armed Forces. American-made M141 hand grenades and M72 RPGs, as well as Javelin anti-tank missile systems supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces as part of the Western military aid from Poland were seized. Currently, the American military is investigating the use of weapons from Ukraine in the ongoing conflict, where in Sudan, smuggled Western weapons from Ukraine are already being used by criminal groups in Western Europe, specifically in France, Britain, and Germany. There are recorded cases of firearms used with the Ukrainian trades during anti-government demonstrations in France and Germany over 2023-2024. Not to mention that terrorists could also exploit this weaponry for their criminal purposes. And, of course, the sponsors of the Bandera regime in Kyiv should give a thought that the arms that they're supplying to Ukraine could be used against them far away from Ukraine, especially in the context of the ongoing debate about continuing Western military aid to the gang of Zelensky. These issues should be touched upon. It is vital for taxpayers in Western countries to understand that, at the behest of their own elites, they're not only financing the continuation of bloodshed in Ukraine, but they're also planting a time bomb in their own home. But there is no doubt that this mine will go off. The thriving corruption at the top of the Kyiv junta, combined with the principle that there is no bad mean for war, fully excludes any kind of control on using this military aid by the West. And perhaps in the future, it could appear for someone who would like to destabilize the situation. And of course, there was a great statement on July 9th, the president of Poland, whose mandate is running out of time, he gave an extensive commentary to the telecompany RMF24 that he's willing to believe the words of Zelensky, who knew nothing about the Volynsk bloodshed, because supposedly those lessons were not taught in the Soviet school. But just a little bit of advice to the Polish president and to others that perhaps they could talk about something else with Zelensky, about math or literature, and they would understand that maths or literature were not taught in that school, or supposedly he did not learn those lessons. We've already published the extensive commentary on our website under the anti-fake title. It's hard to say exactly what Zelensky has learned at school, but the facts are clear. He started following the ideas of Nazism. And unlike him, we very well understand Volynsk bloodshed, and we can recall the facts. This is the murder of Ukrainian nationalists and 1943, 1944, in the west of Ukraine, about hundreds of thousands of civilian Soviet citizens. More of them were Poles, but also Russians, Belarus, Jews, and representatives of other nations of Soviet Union, as well as Ukrainians. And victims of those tragedy should not be divided based on the ethnical principles. All of them are citizens of the USSR who fell at the hands of Hitler's helpers, who were targeting representatives of a special nationality. And this hateful ideology is now followed by the current Ukrainian leaderships. Are they really Ukrainian? They're more of paper dolls. And Polish elites, including the president, Duda, over many years did nothing to prevent the growth of nationalist moods in Ukraine, fully betraying the memory of their own ancestors who were killed by Banderites in the years of war. And Warsaw was blindly following the path of the collective West, fully forgetting their own history or trying to use it in their manipulation, where they remember it when it helps them. And today's Nazis in Ukraine was raised by the West with its Russophobic ideology, who came to power in 2014 after the coup d'etat, and the Polish leadership took part in it. And it was the West who did everything to instigate war and to magnify the suffering of Ukrainians after the acts of Zelensky's band. Russia always stood firm against the changing of history, and Russia's line on presuming the historic truth, as well as investigation of the crimes of Hitler's helpers, remains the same. We have no use of making up childish excuses that supposedly someone had no idea about the crimes of Banderites. And it's unlikely that in the west of Ukraine, as he said, that a grandpa bragged to his granddaughters how he killed his neighbors and killed their children, because those kinds of murderers were persecuted in Russia and the USSR. It's only in Canada that they're glorified and they're giving a standing ovation. But it's Ukraine who is now being supplied with arms and money from Poland. They're the ones glorifying this kind of behavior. And it's all towards the rebirth of Nazism, supposedly, that they're excusing by the supposed fact that it wasn't taught in Soviet schools. No, it was in fact taught in Soviet schools. And we will make sure to publish in the text version of this briefing what we are doing as anti-fake. We're adding links to historical facts, to books of history, to works of historians that were published during the Soviet years. On the situation in Moldova, we're closely following the development of situation, where authorities continue to impose the idea of the so-called European integration to Moldovans under the pretext that it will supposedly save the Republic from the alleged threat from Russia, as they claim. On July 4th this year, in Chisinau, the first Moldova-European Union summit took place, which, according to the organizers' idea, was supposed to look like a historic, fateful event, symbolizing the reversibility of the process of rapprochement between Moldova and the European Union. In reality, this PR act turned out to be pale and insubstantial. The official part lasted less than 2 hours because there was barely anything to discuss. The few guests from Brussels did not bring any breakthrough solutions, therefore they had to limit themselves to public praise and the adoption of a joint declaration about so-called commitments and aspirations and some supposed threats from the Kremlin. But at the same time, the largest section of the declaration is devoted to bilateral cooperation in the field of security and defense. This is yet another very eloquent confirmation of what we have repeatedly drawn attention to. The West is doing everything they can to turn Moldova into a NATO military bridgehead for possible confrontation with Russia. And they're doing it with willing full assistance of official Chisinau, which is systematically pursuing a course of dismantling the neutral status of their country. Although, what kind of country is it? Moldova, if they're citizens of Romania, and they're being forced to rename their own language into Romanian, to turn Moldovans into Romanians. Let me remind you of some facts that the neutral status is enshrined in the Constitution. On July 10th this year, the Moldovan Parliament ratified the Intergovernmental Agreement with Germany on the program of assistance in equipping foreign armed forces and secondment of the Bundeswehr Advisory Group to the Republic, signed by the heads of the defense departments of the two countries in May. How exactly will this contribute to any kind of success in education, to European integration of Moldova in the European Union, which Chisinau is advertising to their citizens? Because European Union is first and foremost economy. So, all of which I've mentioned, all these agreements between the defense ministries of two countries, how exactly will they contribute to the economic development? They will not. It's nothing but lies. On July 11 this year, it was announced that Denmark will allocate about $8 million over 4 years to once again strengthen Moldova's defense capacity.
Moldova didn't receive any funds for its needs in agriculture. Everything goes to militarization of this country for the sake of NATO. At the same time, joint military trainings are being conducted for the UN purposes. In 2024, they conducted totally at the territory in Moldova, together with the participation of Moldova, they conducted 30 trainings. Why do they do all this? The answer is obvious. They are preparing Republic to be the next Ukraine. On July 13, Moldova media informed on the 4 officials of Moldova who died under Kherson. According to data published in military people were sent to the Ukrainian forces to give to get the experience of the front line. This is the experience that they received. The authorities continue an open fight with the opposition politicians. 10th of July, the Court of Moldova decided to arrest the head of Gagauzia region, Evgenia Gatsu. She received the arrest for 30 days. It was prolonged to 30 days until 12th of August, 11th of July. The Office of Moldova required to sentence Marina Tauber for 13 years of imprisonment. This is the requirement that they gave. All this is forcing Moldova to join European standards. If you think that this is to develop science, education, or industry, of course it is not. It is against national interests and their own history. Officially, Chisinau is trying to distract the attention of its people from social and economic problems, because they do not have time for the problems of Moldova. They do not have time to develop their science, their culture, their art. They have a different task from Brussels. They are tasked to join their country with NATO to act against Russia from 5 to 27 July. On the central square of Moldova, an installation was placed with the name, as it said, State Terror in Soviet Moldova, Scale Victims and Perpetrators. In Moldova, the experts, independent experts, name this installation as something that has nothing to do with the real history of the country. The policy of aggressive pro-Western propaganda in the Republic has led to an opposite effect. According to the recent public opinion polls, 60% of respondents believe that Moldova is moving in the wrong direction. 77% think that the national interests of the country are best served by balanced relations with both Russia and Europeans, and 78% support maintaining the Republic's permanent neutrality. The anti-people practices of Brussels do not find support among the friendly people of Moldova, and evidently they will never do so. Now let us look at the real European standards that are being introduced in the territory of Moldova. We regret to inform about the plans of Moldova to limit the constitutional right of thousands of people in Moldova who live in Russia and who want to participate in the election of their parliament. I will remind you the right for participation in voting